else besides with some of my people that I've served with, between 3 people that I can look here. We have over 100 years together. So that's a lot of Army.
A lot of skeletons in your closet.
Well, thank you all so much for being here, and I will hope to tell you some things that you already know, and give you a little insight into some of the things that are going on. But every time I get an introduction like Leonette just gave, I think about the old story of where there were 2 generals and a sergeant, and they were sitting there, and they were playing the what if game. One of the generals asked the other, well, what if you were going to be shot in the morning? What would be your last request? And the general said, well, if I could just see Old Glory go up one more time and hear the national anthem, that would make me so happy. I can't think of anything that would please me more. And he said, well, General, what would make you happy? And he said, well, if I could just get all the troops together one more time and impart on them all the experience that I've had, and just tell them some of the things that I've learned over the years. So then they looked at the NCO that was sitting over there, and they said, well, Sarge, what about you? He said, well, I don't guess it makes much difference, since generals always get their way. I wish they'd just shoot me after the national anthem. Well, I'm not going to tell you a lot of war stories tonight, but I will interject a couple of things that will be in first person. I'm still do a lot of work with NATO. I do a lot of work with preparing units going to serve in Ukraine and other locations. What I want to do is go through tonight and talk about the relevance of NATO and talk about coalitions. And then I want to, if I may, give you a very brief assessment of where we are with our military, and I think it'll all maybe tie together. I'm going to stay away from acronyms, but I do have one acronym right up front: BLUF. Bottom line up front. It's simply, we're living in one of the most perilous, polarized periods of modern times with 2 near-peer competitors. Over the years, when we've done the posture statement, we've built a military that would be prepared to fight 2 simultaneous conflicts. If we drew down, that was one major conflict and hold another major competitor at bay. Now it's fighting one major conflict. We are so polarized now, and I will tell you up front, and then we'll circle around to this in a few minutes. I have been in uniform for 53 years. In August it'll be 53 years. And I've never seen a period of time where our senior leaders have said, if we engage in a conflict with either Russia or China, we cannot decisively win. That's pretty chilling. We cannot win the next conflict right now. Let me tell you why. Let's talk about NATO for a few minutes. And you all probably know most of this, but I'm going to, since all of us come from different backgrounds, I'm just going to kind of go through and tell you what NATO is and what the purpose is and how it's organized. And then we'll talk about some of the other coalitions. The purpose, and as Leonette said, we're on the 70th anniversary. It was to keep the Russians out. This is in 1949. The Americans in and the Germans down. In Germany was added in 1955. We now currently have 29 members. There have been 3 basically enlargements. The last country that was added was in 2017. It was Montenegro. And we have two other countries that would like to get in, but they won't. There are three countries that border Russia to the southeast, to the southwest. And one of them is Belarus. They are so pro-Russia that no one will even speak to them. We cannot do business with them. We will not do business with them. They are, they fit in the same category as Iran, China, North Korea, Belarus, and Russia. Two countries, Georgia, that you hear a lot about, and Ukraine. There's no map. The map is the action plan of how you get into NATO. The way that you get into NATO is the biggest criteria is that you don't have any territorial conflict, because we don't want to bring someone in and then have to go to war with them over a territorial conflict. About 20% of Georgia and the Ukraine, whether or not it's in the Crimea or the other parts of Georgia and Ukraine, are still contested by the Russians. If we brought in Russia or Georgia and Ukraine today, we would have a major conflict with Russia, because it's bordering that's their buffer. And as all of you know, and we can talk more about that if you have some burning questions. Some of the miscellaneous issues that we have with NATO is, of course, our security notations. We have 29 different countries with English being the common language, but we have secrets. We have the cosmic, which is the highest secrets. We have countries that leak like a sieve with information. And part of these issues that we have, whether or not it's exercises, Russia beats our brains out with things from security. When Mrs. Clinton was going through all the things with the security classifications, every soldier in the United States military, or every serviceman in the United States military, and NATO understands this and the ramifications of security leaks. What happens when you leak some of these little things? If you're in an exercise, and we used to be in the exercise business, Mike and Bruce and Leonette, they will take a benign message and make it say anything they want to. They will take an accident where you have two Humvees run together, and all of a sudden, two children were killed in it, and they were orphans and a pregnant mother, and it's all over the press the next day, and that's the way they win their war. And they also keep an eye on all of the security classifications. How's NATO organized? The headquarters is in Mons, Belgium. That's the operational headquarters. We have our headquarters in Norfolk, the transformation. Basically, the leadership is we have one 4-star U.S. American, we have a 4-star Brit, we have a 4-star German, and we have a 3-star French. Why are these people 4 stars, and why is there and 3 stars, and why is that the senior leadership? In NATO, the U.S. pays about 22.2% of NATO. Germany pays 14.5%, Britain pays 10%, and the French pay 10%, makes up 50%. Most of these other countries pay 1 to 2%. So we have under the organization and under the articles, 2 articles that you all are probably familiar with. Article 4 is a rapid deployment force. Rapid deployment force is 4 battalions, essentially. And they rotate. A rapid deployment force calls for being able to deploy 15,000 troops within 5 to 30 days, and they don't have a specific makeup. When you sit back and think about this, you have 15,000 people, that's a rapid deployment force, facing a 1 million man army is coming across the border. This is a token force, but it's political will behind that. The other article is Article 5 that we all are familiar with. Just like the Three Musketeers, you attack one of us, you attack all of us. In the 70 years, it's been enforced one time, 9/11. That is the only time that we've used the Article 5, but that is the thing that keeps the coalition together, because so many of these countries are small, poor, and cannot defend themselves. So that's the umbrella that they operate under. With NATO and the European Command, not only do you have the planning effort and everything that goes along with that, you also have a lot of other things like exercises. I don't know if you watched the testimony from the NATO commander the other day. They were trying to pin him down. How much does Atlantic Resolve cost? He never would say, because it's expensive. They tried every way in the world to get him to give them a number. There were only 8,000 troops involved in it, but there's aviation. You send equipment from the U.S. on MSC ships. You send them to the ports. You operate 17 different ports. You open all these locks. But it's not only exercises, it's not only plans, it's not only a rapid deployment force. It's working together. Two expressions that General Breedlove, who was the former commander of NATO and the commander of the European Command where I once worked, he made two pretty prolific statements. Number one is virtual presence is actual absence. If you're not there, if you're only there on computers, if you're there on VCRs or you're not there. And the other pretty pronounced thing that he said is, you can't surge trust. We can send a lot of folks there, but if they don't trust each other, if they don't work together, then they're basically useless. One of the most important areas that we have is not under NATO, but it's under the European Command, but the State Partnership Program has about 22 different states. It's a National Guard program. 22 different states paired with 22 government, and now we've moved on into Africa and the Middle East and South America with this program. The thing that makes this so important is that these states are paired with countries, and they're paired for different reasons. Alabama happens to be paired with Romania. When I was over there, I caught a lot of grief about that. They kept saying that the reason that we were paired with Romania was that we had so many socioeconomic similarities. They happen to be the poorest country in Europe, so I had to live that down. But you have places like the Ukraine that's paired with California. That's the largest Ukrainian population outside of Ukraine. Poland is paired with Chicago. Chicago is the third largest Polish city. Georgia with Georgia, just simply because of the two names, and so on and so forth. This has been going on since 1991. When I was in Europe in the early 2000s, you could be a 4-star or a 3-star or a 2-star, and it didn't make any difference. I could call, if I needed something in Romania, I could call the Alabama National Guard and say, who is the liaison? And they've probably been working with those folks for 15 years. So they knew them personally, grew up with them. I can't tell you how many times we've had the Romanians here in Alabama. We've built them a hospital. We've shared information technology, scholarships, and the list goes on. 80% of our contact with Eastern Europe has been through this program. So not only do we have everything from chaplains conferences to NCO non-commissioned officer training, because you look at some of these countries. If you look at places like Lithuania and Estonia and Latvia, They only had a military since 1991. When the Russians left, they killed everybody and decimated them. So I was sitting in Lithuania in 2002 when they got into NATO, and we were out there. I was sitting with the ambassador. They were doing their demonstration like they're supposed to do to graduate into NATO, and they were getting ready to get their flag. This was in 2002. And the first thing they went out to start the exercise, they went out with a bugle. A bugle. And I looked at the ambassador. He said, "Oh, this does your heart great, doesn't it? What do you think?" I said, "Well, looks like a big target to me." They were so rudimentary. But then, after having spent 35 years in the military, it dawned on me, it's easy to be a leader in the United States Army. It's easy. We pay our troops, our equipment runs, we have state-of-the-art, and the troops will follow us anywhere we tell them to go. There, not so much. They work with nothing. Their equipment didn't run. At the end of the exercise, had to drag most of it off the field because it didn't work. Let's talk a little bit about Eurasia. Part of the area that we have a concern with, obviously, is Russia and China. The stands, then you go to Ukraine and Georgia and Belarus. The other group that we're not involved in, but that is so important to Europe, is the European Union. 28 member states, largest trade bloc in the world. We do about a little $3 trillion with them. And there's in this area in blue, there's about 500 million people. In NATO, there's about 800 million because we have partner states. So we have, it's a monetary union, but they don't have any way of defense. Everything has to be by consensus. In NATO, not so much. So while we're looking at some of the coalitions, and one of the first things that you get in trouble with at NATO is calling NATO a coalition. NATO is not a coalition, it's an alliance, and they are very proud of that fact. The Partnership for Peace, which is probably the most predominant or the oldest for that area, was in 1997. In that, you have the 26 of the NATO nations, 23 non-NATO, and the programs tailored to national needs. Well, what are those programs? They primarily talk about mutual defense. They talk about terrorism, sex trafficking, drugs, nuclear, and they do more talk than they do anything because you have to have a consensus. And when you have a wide variety of everything from the former states of the Confederation to Russia and to this whole mishmash of people, it's a good thing to have open dialogue. The ambassadors meet about once a month, and the chief of defense is on an annual basis. So let's talk a little bit about coalitions. Some of the coalitions, one of the strongest ones, is the Shanghai Corporation Organization. It was founded in 2001. It's primarily made up of the Chinese and the Russians. The official languages are both Chinese and Russian, unlike the NATO, which is English. And the full members, and these are important: China, all the stands, Russia, India, Pakistan. The observers include Iran, Mongolia, Afghanistan, and Belarus. One of the biggest issues that we have is that This organization is starting their own monetary currency. It's called BRAC. Brazil, Russia, India, and China. That makes up 3/4 of the population of the world. They don't want to use U.S. currency because they can move with their own currency. They can move and do nefarious trading. We have it where they have it where we can't keep up with what they're doing. All kind of illicit arms, all kind of money laundering, et cetera, et cetera. This is one of the organizations I'm going to talk about in just 1 minute. But some of the other players, Organization for Security and Cooperation, 57 states, includes Russia and U.S. as full members. Again, dialogue, talking about all these things. The second one is the one that concerns me more than anything, and if it goes into the Shanghai Corporation, which they're talking about, is the Collective Security Treaty Organization. It includes all the stands, which is all the Russian adjacent areas. They have the same policy that NATO has. If you attack one of those, you attack them all. And what happens when Russia and China implement that? What happens when they admit Iran into that? And we have to go after the Iranian nuclear. It will not be pretty if we start a war and we are fighting that whole part of the world. So, the Eurasian Economic Community, which includes Belarus, the stands, and Russia, and in both of these, if you belong to one organization or one alliance, you can't belong to another that would be opposing. So they have them locked down. And that's the reason we're getting so polarized. And then the community of democratic choice, and the list goes on and on. So what are our interests in the region? Obviously, access, overflight. The European provide military resources, political and economic. I can debate with you the pros and cons of us being in NATO. If you read recently Trump's assessment of Europe is not paying, or NATO members are not paying enough, that we want out. He won that debate. We only had 5 countries that were paying the mandatory 2% of the GDP, gross domestic product. Now there are 8. There are 10 more that are supposed to be there within by 2020. And then the rest of them are coming along behind that. They're so poor they will never be able to put 2% in. But let's talk just briefly about what NATO cost. NATO cost this year, in 2017, 2018, was about $1.3 billion. That's to pay the military. Another $220 million to pay the civilian force and keep the facilities in bombs. And then another $750 million for command and control upgrades. A little over $2 billion. We're supposed to pay 22%. If we only had to pay the 22%, that would be a bargain for the U.S. If you're in a debate with people and talk about the pros and cons of NATO, they will tell you very quickly that if you have an issue with throughout the world, if you go to the UN, if the UN won't vote for it, then NATO will, because we will bully them into doing it. In 2011, instead of having a $2 billion budget, in 2011, in the height of Afghanistan and Iraq, the budget was a little over $1 trillion. So one of the reasons that countries don't mind going to war as much is we pay their bill. Georgia, it has more soldiers per capita still in Afghanistan than any other country. In Afghanistan, we've had about 250,000 foreign NATO troops there. We had 6,500 casualties, over 1,000 killed. Most of those countries would not go unless their state partners went. If Romania was going, they wanted the Alabama National Guard and go with them. They got new equipment out of it. They got paid. They got per diem. So that's if you to using the Trump argument. Mr. Trump said we pay 70% of NATO. Well, that's not exactly true, because we have a standing force anyway. Our standing force is, you can, just like with Germany, he says Germany is not paying their fair share. Germany says that they are, because they're contributing airfields, they're contributing equipment, they're contributing command and communications, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to be very careful when you hear these debates and make sure that you understand what they're talking about when a person or people are trying to make their point. Missile defense, we're putting $1 billion worth of missile defense in Poland. Poland has about a 1 million man army, and they're our strongest ally there right now. Again, if you watch the press, they have Fort Trump that is getting ready to be built there. And the Russians are very concerned about that, because that will be a formidable force. Trade relationships, I mentioned we do about $3 trillion worth a year. Arms control, narcotics, hydrocarbons, you often hear the debate, again, especially with Germany and Britain. And when I was in Europe, every morning that I got up and took a hot shower, I did with the compliments of the Russian government. We use their gas. They probably, up until last year, and they're putting another pipeline in there now, we're using about 70% of the fuel in Western Europe and Eastern Europe comes from Russia. And what does that do? Funds the Russian government. And that's one of the reasons we're trying to get them out of the hydrocarbons and get them on natural gas and other means of fuel. And then we have we want to balance Russia, because Russia opposes further NATO expansions for the main reasons I mentioned a while ago. And if you talk to an old Russian, they will say, look, we're not expansionist. We don't want to happen to us what happened in World War II. We don't want anyone to invade the motherland. Well, when you have an expeditionary force, that's not necessarily defending the motherland. That's going out after the rest of Europe and other locations. And then we want to balance Russia and Western Europe depends on the energy. So we have to be involved there to keep the Russians out and us in. So there's a monetary and there's a political reasons. So all of these competing interests, balance Russia with China, cyber warfare, hydrocarbons, counterterrorism, NATO expansion, and then nuclear proliferation. We could talk all day about cyber war. Is cyber war a war? I think so. They are between the Chinese and the Russians and the Ukrainians and the Georgians and the other, trying about 30,000 hits a day on our computer systems. So we have the coalitions, polarization, but we really haven't talked much about the threat. We have about Russia, and they have not been sitting still for the last 15 years. and China. In my opinion, China is the biggest threat that we have. China has declared that they're going to be world leaders again. We will be in a conflict with China before long. Our senior leaders are saying, pray for peace and prepare for war, because it's going to happen. It's going to happen, maybe not in an overt way. It's going to happen when a hotshot 22-year-old pilot tries to fly up another U.S. hotshot 22-year-old pilot, and they get wing to wing, and they hit something, and one of them goes down, or a Chinese trawler or a Chinese sub hits a Lithuanian trawler, and there we go again. Let me take just 1 minute and tell you where I think the military is. The assessment, in my opinion, is 100% correct. We cannot fight and win a major conflict decisively right now. Why? We have the best fighter in the world. They have F-16, they have 35s. But guess what? If you're based in Hanscom Air Force Base, or pick a place in the U.S. and fly them over, because we only have one air base in Germany now, with the exception of Ramstein. So we fly our aircraft over from over here to there. Be there in 7 hours. So why? Our Congress said, why spend all that money over there? Why not house all of it here? And we have all of our contractors here, and blah, blah, blah. Guess what? The Russians have figured this out, and the Chinese have too. If you fly an aircraft and it has to be refueled twice from here to there, what do? You knock out all the KC-130s. And you wind up a third of the way or halfway in the ocean. They figured that out. We won't be able to get our aircraft in the fight. Our Navy is 325,000 Navy. We are 24,000 sailors short right now of being able to man the ships. The Army has been doing this for years. We're cross-level. They cannot get the ships out of the port because they don't have enough qualified sailors to sail. You see these accidents that we're having. A couple of reasons we're having the accidents. Number one, undertrained. These are bright young men and women. I do a lot of work with the Navy. Brilliant, but they're overworked. They're working double shifts because they don't have enough people, and they're not trained as properly as they should be. And so you wind up having these accidents. Air Force, 30% of the aircraft won't fly, either because of the equipment or the pilot shortage. Army, we have a measurable element is brigade combat teams. We have about 35 of them. 4 or 5 of them are in the National Guard. 35% of them are combat ready, 1/3. Primarily because of the shortage of money that we've had over the years, where we can't do the collective training at the national training centers and other locations. The modern battlefield is very complex, very synchronized. And if we were fighting it, that's one thing. We're fighting with 28 other nations. That's something else as well. So it takes a lot of practice doing that. How do we fight the next war? We have some of the finest young men and women that you can imagine serving in our military. They're not doing it for the money. They make more money being an electrician or doing whatever. They have a tremendous amount of responsibility. They work long hours. The only thing that we can do, because of the technology that Russia and China have, they have what is called a bar 3. It's an instrument that they have on their plane. They can fly up our exhaust undetected. They have a PL-12. It's about 26 feet long. It can be launched from a boat, a ship, an airplane, a truck. 300 kilometers. It hits with the force of a nuclear device. It will hit a ship, go through the aircraft carrier, burn all the way through it, just like a nuclear device. You can shoot that from here, and if you were at the Perdido Resort in Gulf Shores, you don't say, can you hit that? Can you hit that target? You say, which window do you want it in? These things are deadly, deadly accurate. You've been reading about the hypersonic missiles. One shot, one kill. We have 11 aircraft carriers, 5,500 sailors on each aircraft. 50 aircraft or so, 50 airplanes on each one. They can take out an aircraft carrier at will. One shot, one kill. We have no defense against it. Kind of scary. But the scary part is that we don't, when the first launch is made, when they shoot that first one, we used to call aircraft carriers 5 acres of floating America. Now they laughingly call it a target. So what happens? They shoot the first one. What do? The only thing we can do is level everything where we think that the hypersonic missile was shot from or will be shot from, and take out every bit of communications we can take care of. Take care of every airport, every seaport, and every bit of communications. It will not be a pretty sight, but that is the only way that we can fight and win the next war. We're prepared to do that. We hope that cool heads will prevail, and it won't happen. Some of the things that we're concerned about, that we do drills on a daily basis. We keep talking about the cyber war and looking at power companies, taking down the power grids. No one knows what will happen if a Chinese sub was 200 miles off the coast, launch a nuke over the East Coast, and fry every piece of communications that we have up and down the East Coast, and put us back into the dark ages. That's kind of frightening when you think about it. So the only thing that we can do when that first one happens is launch. And we have gotten farther and farther behind over the last several years. Our adversaries have not been sitting there doing nothing. They have so many devious plans and with lethal weapons. We haven't even talked about Africa. Those are CNN moments down there. They're going on there. We say that it's ethnic cleansing. They say it's tribal warfare. But when one country gets or one party gets in charge, they kill everybody else. We haven't had any CNN moments recently, unless you pay real close attention. Sudan, just this week, having a coup there, having one right now. There are probably 3 coups going on in Africa right now. When I was at the European Command, we monitored wheat. Because in most African countries, when you have a family that lives on $1 a day, and a baguette or a loaf of bread goes up 3 cents because of wheat prices, that's pretty devastating. Pretty devastating to that leadership in that country, because they'll overthrow it. We haven't talked about North Korea. We can take care of North Korea. They're not expeditionary. They're contained. It will be a horrific situation because North Korea can put 30,000 artillery rounds on Seoul in the first 2 minutes and then sustain it with 5,000 rounds for the next 6 hours and level it. We have technology on our side. We're making great strides. We think that whether or not it's a space command that you keep reading about, what are they going to do? They'll be going after satellites. They'll be going after how do you shoot down these hypersonic missiles. They'll be talking about everything from lasers to that's already in the works. But it's going to be a race to the future. Again, I think that if you could sit down and talk to the Pacific Command or with NATO, and they will sit before Congress, and they have if any of you have read the excerpts from the testimony last week, before last, they will put on a brave face. They will say, we need more troops. We're getting good, well-trained people coming in from the States in rotational forces. Well, that's because we're cross-leveling and filling up these units to send them over there. They said that they go over there for 3 or 4 months and go back home, cross-level again, and back we go. We have again, brilliant, dedicated young men and women. And I think that they are being treated with the respect, for the most part, that they deserve. We talk about VA, we talk about taking care of these troops, you know, and Iraq and Afghanistan, 13% of our casualties were PTSD. Not a whole lot being done about that. There's not a whole lot being done with the drugs that have resulted from that. But we're making progress. It's not because they don't care. It's just very complicated. So with that, after a little food for thought, if anyone has any questions, I'll be glad to try to.
Want to fill out a quick question?
While Joyce is filling her question out, I want to preempt just a bit and ask you to expand on China's economic inroads in Africa and South America.
When China, look, we may have the next war, and the shot may not be fired. About economics. Who do you think we have a $22 trillion debt here? What kind of collateral do we have for that?
Land.
Who do you think owns that collateral? China. They have to own the debt. When they went into Africa, Africans welcomed them in because they thought that they were going to put all the investment in down there. They thought that they were going to open all these mines, and what happened was they did. They opened the mines, they built the housing, moved the Chinese in, and they're living in enclaves there. They control 80% of the world's precious metals and strategic metals. They own them. The Philippines. I'm working, I'll leave tomorrow morning, first thing. The Chinese have loaned the Durante, the president of the Philippines, billions of dollars. So have the Russians. So have we. But they're calling in their debt. Who's going to win out? That is a potential for the next conflict. You go into Venezuela. Who do you think's behind all that? Both the Russians and the Chinese. Brazil. They do the same thing there that they've done in Africa. Did that become kind of close?
Yeah. we're gonna circle back around, because you mentioned Norfolk earlier. So would you elaborate on the military's concern about climate change and how that's going to affect some of our installations and preparations in the future? And we wanna touch on diplomacy and how that has factored into an element of power for the U.S.
I would point you for the best answer to the climate change, to what General Scarpetti made his comments 2 weeks ago. Yes, we are concerned about climate change. That is not an area that I've ever been concerned with. I'm an engineer, and I'm not one of the engineers that build things. I'm one of the engineers that blew things up. So we were not as concerned about that as our military is. We're trying to make inroads into, when you talk about the military, quite often when I do a commissioning ceremony, I'll tell a young man, a young lady, that you have people talking about going to the top 100 companies in the world and going to work for them. The military, you become when you become a second lieutenant, you become the top 70% of the top 5 companies in the world. It is the U.S. military. Climate change, trying to think what Scarpetti discussed. I know that's on the forefront. Most of our military installations now are carbon-free, hydrocarbon-free. There's solar panels everywhere. You can park in the shade because you usually park in the parking lot under a solar panel. But I don't think that I can adequately answer what the military's, and some of y'all may have the answer to that, more so than I can answer that question.
Okay, but what, knowing that DOD and the Secretaries of State don't always see eye to eye on things, what role is diplomacy playing in some of this complex environment?
I was a liaison from the European Command back in the State Department, and I had the opportunity to do several congressionals and hearings. I had the dubious honor of closing down Bosnia. We were closing down Kosovo when I left. I was in Liberia when we did the regime change with Charles Taylor down there. We used to laugh that the State Department's idea of a successful meeting is establishing the time for the next meeting. And the military is sitting there. Right now, we have 175,000 troops in 158 different countries. And there are only 190 countries, and we're in just about all of them. We have a million-man army in the army, and we have to do something with them today. We can't wait 6 months. You do something with people. We work fairly closely with the State Department. We work fairly closely with the country ambassadors. It sounds negative, but the United States of America is probably the worst partner that anyone can have. Why do I say that? Because we vacillate. Who's in office today? Who are we for today? Who's the other side for today? People that we are 100% for, whether or not it's Israel or whether or not it's countries in Africa, whether or not it's North Korea, it's a constant battle of who we're going to support. The State Department are made up of 2 different kinds of folks. You have the career statesmen, and then you have the appointees. person that bundled a lot of money for a president does not necessarily mean that they're the best qualified to go be the statesman for that country. So we do typically have a very good relationship with the working ambassadors. It's the senior leadership, and when you think about Congress, what can they do? They can either throw money at something or take money away from something. They sit up there and think that they're in control of everything, but that's what it all boils down to. Who are we going to befriend today? One of the problems that we have, it's not as bad, I think, as if you watch MSNBC or NBC or ABC or Fox or pick one. We have too many talking heads that analyze everything that's going on. And I think, quite frankly, some of them get in the car on the way to the studio and think, what thing can I say today? Maybe an outrageous thing that's going to get me invited back tomorrow to be an expert with this. So I think you have two things going on. You have information and disinformation and misinformation, and then you have the professionals working the issues, and then you have the people down at the country level. I don't think it's in as much disarray at the working level as it would appear if you turn into one of the major news networks tonight and listen. I mean, pick one and you get three different opinions if you watch three different stations, depending on who the person is.
Okay, we have a really good question about why doesn't the military redirect some of the money and save it, for example, by closing some obsolete bases? So perhaps you could go through that process and how Congress is helpful or not in that process.
Congress are obstructionists. Most of your military are not parochial. You may have a commander at Fort Lewis McChord in Washington, and he will fight tooth and nail while he's the commander of that base out there, and then when he gets sent to Fort Rucker, he'll fight tooth and nail for that one down there. Is there any doubt in anyone's mind in this room why Boeing builds an aircraft in 50 states and 3 territories? Is there any doubt in anyone's mind that we have enough money to run the military if it was properly spent? The Congress is telling the Navy how many ships they need, not the admirals and not the civilian leadership in the Department of Defense. Congress now. They're telling people, you can't close these bases. We've got to keep these bases open. Guess why? Because they're in their district. We could close a lot of these facilities. They don't want to send people overseas. They want to keep them locally because it generates an awful lot of money. And Alabama is no different. You know, everyone thinks every congressman ought to be fired, except who? Theirs. You know, we keep ours a fair one. And that's, we can't save money this year and roll it over next year. You have to spend it this year. And you spend that because if you don't spend that amount of money this year, you get derogated next year for the amount that you didn't spend because you didn't need it. And we throw money away like it's going out of style. We have enough money to run the military if it's properly spent. Now, does that sound cynical?
So, sir, the League is all about researching, listening, and making some decisions based on the best evidence. So for those of us who feel like a vote is a big step And what should we be doing as citizens and voters based on what you've told us here tonight?
Well, that's a good question, and most of us that have been in uniform, while some of us have been reservists and served the country in a lot of different ways and had civilian jobs, we would really, when you're in uniform, you have to be nonpartisan. Did I vote in every election? Yes. Did I tell anyone how I voted? No. I'm getting a little bit more outspoken these days. I think the things that we have to keep in mind is that you can listen to the debates and you sort through these things of what works and what doesn't work. Who's our friend and who's not our friend. Look, I got a daughter that's a social worker. And you can imagine the debates that she and I have. Do you put the money where it needs to be at home with the homeless and with the downtrodden and education and all these things, or do you do national defense? That has to be a happy medium. And I think we have to hold our politicians to what they said that they were going to do when they ran. You can't charge them with a lie because they said, well, I was running. The conditions change, and I can't vote for this because there was one word in there that I think you have to research. You have to know where we are, and when people are saying that we are a safe, secure nation, we are not. And in my opinion, that is the number one function of the United States government, is to keep us safe. We have an energy department that doesn't produce 1 gallon of fuel. We have an educational department that doesn't do a whole lot other than send tens of thousands of people. But the one thing that they're supposed to do is keep us safe, and we're not. So, to me, is the number one issue that'll happen in 2020, is it national defense? No, but it should rank right up there. But every politician, most of the politicians that will stand up and say, we need to take care of our veterans. We need to make sure that they're when we send them off to war, they bring them back, and we take care of them. Do they do that in practice? Not so much. I'm not. I'm listening to one of the news today that said you should never send your child off to a university, and God forbid that they get a liberal arts degree, and they can't. Well, that's what I have. I was a political science major, and I cannot sort through. I don't know that I can sit down and advise the League of Women Voters what you need to be looking at, other than if I was doing it, national security is my number one. That would be number one on my bucket list. And I know I didn't answer your question. I just don't know the answer.
That's a thoughtful answer. I think we're at a good stopping point with that overarching view, and we so appreciate General Darden being with us. Provocative does not begin to explain what we have heard here tonight, and I hope we will go and pay more attention to international news, although there's a dearth of it in the local papers and the regional papers. You have to really dig for it. And I hope that we will remember it's not all in our backyard, but that a lot of things that happen far, far away will impact us in a very personal way. So thank you again on behalf of the League.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all again for being with us tonight, and I hope you will tell everybody that we have recorded this, and that it can be available on our website, I believe.
Yes.
And you can go and re-listen to some of the nuggets from John Darden, and then take action that you feel is appropriate with your elected leaders. Thank you.
It's helped me, because I know